Good afternoon. My name is Kimberly Limore. I am on the Executive Steering Committee for the Catholic Prison Ministry Coalition. We welcome you to our monthly advocacy webinar, and we are glad that you decided to join us on today. There are a few more people kind of coming in a little straggling, but as they connect their video, we will continue to begin our session for today. Again, we are going to be talking about human trafficking. And we have a special guest, Marilyn Zigmund Luke, and I will introduce her after we do our prayer. I ask you if you want to, you can turn on your cameras so you can stay engaged. And also, if you have any questions during this seminar, please feel free to put them in the chat. We will definitely address them at the end of the Marilyn's session. So again, let us go into the presence of God. I have a prayer for the end of human trafficking that is shared by the Sisters of Charity of St. Elizabeth, Covenant Station, New Jersey. God of freedom, beauty, and truth, we believe that your deepest desire, your most powerful energy is that all creation might know abundant life. We raise our voices in anguished prayer for our sisters and brothers, women and girls, men and boys who are modern day slaves. They are your beloved daughters and sons, exploited sexually or forced to work because of human violence and greed. Fill us with your holy anger and your sacred passion, that those who are trafficked might know healing and justice, that traffickers will come to repentance and conversion, that all of us might live in such a way that others are not made to pay the price for our comfort and convenience. Hasten the coming of the day when all people and our precious earth itself will be treated not as a commodity, but as a radiant images of your freedom, beauty, and truth. Amen.
Amen.
So again, thank you all for joining us. A few more people have come into the room, so we're glad to see you on today. Again, feel free that those who want to turn on their cameras, you can. And any questions that might come up during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. So today we are pleased to have back with us Marilyn Zigmund Luke, who is Director of Advocacy for the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking. She leads and coordinates the organization's public policy and legislative advocacy activities and campaigns. Marilyn has worked with all levels of government, and she has over 25 years of professional experience with both public and private sector organizations. She is a licensed attorney in the District of Columbia and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So today we welcome to our webinar on advocacy webinar on human trafficking, Marilyn Zigmund Luke. Marilyn, take it away.
Thank you so much, Kim, for that nice introduction. And I want to thank Courtney, Kara, and Karen for inviting me back. I'm happy to talk today about online child safety. And in preparing for today's webinar, I asked Courtney why this would be of interest to the group. And she reminded me that this is really about prevention. The more that we can stop victimization of children, the more that we can prevent trauma, that actually keeps people out of the prison system. And so with that in mind, I thought we could talk a bit about what's happening at the federal level in terms of online child safety legislation. And I can share with you a little bit about my experience and what we think is going to happen moving forward. Before I do that, I just want to remind everybody about my organization. We are formally the U.S. Catholic Sisters Against Human Trafficking, and many of you may know us by that name. We rebranded in October of 2023, and we are now considered the Alliance to End Human Trafficking. Primarily, this group started with 15 sisters who were engaged in anti-trafficking work, and they were working with throughout the United States and in Washington, D.C., and they decided that we needed to have more focus on human trafficking and particularly advocacy at the federal, state, and local levels. So they got together many years ago. They talked with the Polaris Project, and that's a group that actually oversees the human trafficking hotline and compiles statistics. And through their work in what they consider themselves to be a mustard seed ministry, we now have the Alliance today. And it's really a national network that focuses on corporate advocacy as well as federal, state, and local. Part of the reason that it's really my privilege to work with the organization is because we are a faith-based network, and we really center our goals and our work around the dignity that is inherent in every person. We have a commitment particularly to the poor and the vulnerable, and we want to make sure that we promote the common good. In terms of human trafficking, it can be a very difficult and emotionally heavy topic to address, but we feel that through solidarity with one another and our willingness to enter the sorrow as well as the joy of recovery for many of the victims, that is our, not just our job, but our ministry. So with that, I thought I would start out with just sharing some realities with children today. For those of us who are older, we didn't have phones, computers, and the internet. I remember when I was in college, we were just beginning to use computers in the classroom. And fast forward to today, that situation has totally changed. It is very common, even at the preschool level, for children to become involved with technology, whether it's in preschool, whether it's through games on a phone. We have definitely gone well beyond TV-based platforms and now get into interactive and online engagement. So Courtney, if we could jump ahead to slide 5, one of the things that I thought was important is that now we're focused on what's called social media. And those are different applications and platforms through which children post pictures of themselves, and they can actually engage online with other individuals intended to be other children of their age, but as we'll come to talk about in a few minutes, definitely can be adults, predators, and traffickers. And since the beginning of the internet, and I think social media specifically, child sexual exploitation has really become one of the biggest challenges for technology companies. The internet has really changed and revolutionized not only access to children, but the way that the traffickers groom and recruit their victims. And what we've come to experience and learn is that traffickers often use what we call covert communications when they're getting involved with either advertising or selling their victims or enticing children to become engaged with them. They often use hidden meanings or emojis, which are different symbols that can be used in conversation. And typically these symbols and images are understood only by those who are involved in buying and selling of children. When we talk about children specifically, we all know that their brains have not fully formed until they're in their 20s. And particularly in terms of research, we see that around age 10, they start to really seek social rewards, and that is craving attention and approval. The traffickers and the groomers know this, and so in terms of online engagement, they are very happy to try and provide that to the children in order to make them victims and further traumatize them. And we do recognize that trafficking can be hard to recognize, particularly in the online environments, because it can be challenging for parents to understand all of the different technology that exists out there. Children can find ways to work around some of the protections that are put in place by applications and platforms. And the groomers and the traffickers certainly are very in tune with how to contact children and how to access them without their parents knowing. So it definitely can be very difficult from the parental perspective, from the technology perspective, from the legislative perspective, and from the identification and intervention perspective. So if we could move to the next slide, I thought we would just talk about some key terms and what this means. In terms of online safety, we definitely have human trafficking occurring. That includes recruitment of children, grooming them, as well as buying and selling online. There's also something called sextortion. And primarily, this is where an adult coerces a child to either take explicit images and send them, or to live stream themselves in different sexual acts. And then they use that as an extortion mechanism to get the child to keep producing or to keep engaging in the behavior. Oftentimes, the children are embarrassed. They don't know what to do in terms of dealing with this situation, and they get involved in a cycle of continuing to provide this information to an online person, thinking at some point it will stop, and it just keeps going and going. And I think one of the most disturbing things, at least for me personally, is the creation, distribution, and live streaming of what we call CSAM, or child sexual abuse material. The Zoom platform that we're on today is great for education and interactive because it allows us to see each other and have our camera and be engaged in an online environment. But this tool can be definitely misused by traffickers because they can get involved in live streaming acts that they entice a child to engage with, specifically in terms of live streaming. And it can be child self-generated, where they're manipulating the child to do it themselves. It can be offender streaming, where they can actually have an adult abusing a child and live streaming that online. And we can have what's called virtual child sex trafficking. And this is when an offender actually pays to watch while somebody else abuses a child and they live stream it. There was a federal hearing several weeks ago, and they talked about this specifically. One of the individuals who testified said that they can now pay for different acts that they want to occur. And then this happens, it can be on an international basis, and the child is victimized. Someone's paying and directing for what they want to see live streamed. So if we can move to the next slide. In terms of technology and children, there's been a lot of momentum lately to get Congress to do something. And from my perspective, we'll talk in a little bit about the number of bills that are pending. I think it's important that from a technological standpoint, we have to understand where we're at right now and what we need Congress to do and where we need the internet and social media to go in order to stop this atrocious behavior and this ongoing traumatization and victimization of children. So legally right now, you may have heard about the Section 230 protections. Essentially, this is already established in law, and it says that for technology companies, they're not liable for the actions and the speech that occurs on their sites because they're not actively engaging in it or promoting it. It's simply a user prompting that. And at the time that the internet was coming into fruition, it was thought that they don't have the ability to police every single thing that happens. So they gave them this liability protection, what's commonly been known as the Section 230. There are also techniques now called encryption. And what this allows would be conversations to transmit through the internet, whether it's a platform or an application. And it can be done privately. Elon Musk gave an interview many weeks ago, and he talked about encryption. And he said, even if somebody put a gun to your head, you wouldn't be able to break that. So why is that important for the legislation and for our purposes? Encrypted technologies actually now can allow for the CSAM material to be sent without being able to detect that or investigate it. And in terms of communications with children, if conversations are happening between an adult and a child online and it's encrypted, there would be no way for any sort of oversight of that. So I offer that to you as something we want to think about. And I think the third thing that's important to understand with online environments is that there are algorithms. So these are the things that function behind the scenes that really direct content to children, but also direct predators to children. So I'll give sort of a real life example. Many children who are online may be in a very innocent or age-appropriate application, trying to do, let's say, tutoring or online homework support. And oftentimes, material and ads can come to them that either offer pornography or are sexually explicit. That's happening because the system is allowing those sorts of materials to come into the child's view. But it also allows predators to target children. So if a predator knows that children are, for example, in an online interacting gaming system, they can be online playing a video game. They can be connected with their friends who are in different locations. And because of this collaborative platform, the predators actually know how to infiltrate that, and the algorithm can direct them to these specific sites and platforms. So in terms of the programming and technology, that's something we want to think about in terms of legislation and how that impacts child safety online. If we could move to the next slide. I've listed here a number of pending federal bills. And at the Alliance, we have been engaged for a long time in terms of the Earn It Act. This is a piece of legislation that has been pending for quite some time. And I want to call out one of my sisters, Sister Margaret Ann Meyer, who is a medical missionary of Mary. She has been really shepherding this and has seen it as her ministry to really watch what's happening with the Earn It Act. We felt that this was an important piece of legislation because it would take away for the first time that Section 230 liability protection that I talked about. And in terms of establishing a national commission on online child sexual exploitation and prevention, we thought the Earn It Act was really making some headway and really building some groundbreaking concepts in terms of that. As I mentioned, Congress held some hearings a few weeks ago. One was before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and the House Judiciary Committee also had one. And one of the things that was striking to me was the number of parents who attended one of the hearings, and they brought pictures of their children who actually committed suicide or who had been victims of human trafficking because of what happened in the online environments. And it was also striking to me that while the technology companies talked about the tools that they use to identify these situations and the money that they invest in it, none of the technology leads, none of the heads of these organizations would commit to supporting the legislation. They simply said they would be open to conversations, but they didn't support to any really specific actions or specific bills. And I think, at least from my perspective, that says a lot. So we have been hoping that whether it's the Earn It Act, whether it's the SHIELD Act, whether it's the Stop CSAM Act, and all of the others that we have listed here, there's a full suite of bills that are pending. We hope that at some point, Congress will see fit to pass any or all of these, either in part or in total. Because at least if we can get a step forward, there are a number of components in each piece of legislation that I think can be important in terms of protecting children online. The SHIELD Act is really important because that is focused on prosecution, and they want to make sure that there are tools to address non-consensual distribution of sexual imagery. The Stop CSAM Act is intended to really increase accountability and transparency for online platforms. So I mentioned to you about how these algorithms are working. The public does not generally know what those are and how they're working. So the Stop CSAM Act would require some accountability and transparency with regard to that. The Project Safe Childhood Act, we like that bill because it would promote and modernize the investigation of prosecution of online child exploitation. And the Report Act we liked because that one would really combat the rise in child sexual exploitation by having new measures to help strengthen reporting, particularly to what's called the cyber tip line. So if we could move to the next slide, there are a number of things that the industry could do, the technology companies could do without regard to federal legislation. But as I've mentioned, these concepts have been pending in Congress for some time, and we have yet to see the technology companies do this. A couple of things that would be great would be if there were age rating for applications. So before a child would become involved in an application that their parent would give them on their phone or their iPad or their tablet, there would be an age rating that what would be appropriate use, 14 and above, 16 and above, 18 and above. We've also seen some movement at the state level in terms of parental consent for children's use and access. We recently saw that Texas put a law into effect with respect to this, and that required Pornhub, which is a specific sexually explicit platform, to stop operating in the state because they were opposed to this parental consent. I've talked a bit about the technical liability and removing the Section 230 protections, but we also think that the technology companies, they have a multitude of tools. They could certainly do scanning for child sexual abuse material on their platforms. We also would recommend applications to help identify trafficking victims. One of the things that was really important to know is that once the CSAM is placed online, it's important to try and identify not only who is doing it, but who is being victimized, because we need to be able to intervene and stop that abuse from occurring. So applications that can help through facial recognition and other technology tools can really help law enforcement identify and rescue trafficking victims. With respect to that, we've heard from the technology companies that oftentimes they have CSAM removed from their platforms after 90 days, or if it's identified, they take it away. And that can actually hinder law enforcement, we've heard, because they need to be able to have that material retained, not only in order to have time to identify the victims, but then also aid in their prosecution. So we think there could be more done in terms of retention requirements of data on the platforms that can really be used to help law enforcement in both identification and rescuing trafficking victims. And of course, we all know about the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We encourage the partnership between that organization and law enforcement to help identify children and bring them home. So if we could go to the next slide, one of the things that the Alliance did several weeks ago is we went on record with Congress and we issued a statement of our recommendations for what we think the legislation should do to protect children online. And while there are a number of components to our recommendations, we think they're all equally important. The first thing we want is that technology companies should be required to do more to prevent, detect, and report human trafficking. They know the risk to children. They were in the room when the parents came and talked about their experiences. But yet, to me at least, it seems that they really have failed to sufficiently expose and combat the CSAM that's on their websites. To them, it is business as usual, and there really doesn't seem to be a sense of urgency to change their business practices and processes. As I mentioned at the recent hearings, they were reluctant to support any piece of legislation. And so we can't just continue to move forward without some kind of change. So we have the momentum now in Congress. We're hoping that there will be some sense of urgency to change these technology business practices and processes. We also think now that the internet has evolved and we've grown in terms of online engagement. So technology companies cannot and should not be immune from liability when children are harmed. Imagine being the parent or the child who has been victimized, trafficked, or even committing suicide because of something that happened on these tools that children are using. We think that Congress should remove the long-standing immunity protections that these technology companies enjoy, and that there really needs to be some recognition that the child victims, in terms of their harm and trauma, they should have recourse against those who helped not only facilitate their abuse and trafficking, as well as the traffickers themselves. We also support the algorithms that are used to direct content to children being made transparent and public. The only way that we can really start to get a sense about what's happening behind the scenes is to have proactive deterrence and detection of these algorithms. And in terms of analyzing content and online behavior, these technology companies can and should be using it to identify CSAM and trafficking online. We also support children being able to restore their dignity through seeking compensation from those who are facilitating or directing the harm that they suffer. And this includes having a right to demand that the CSAM that's online be removed and that their abuse not be allowed to continue. We think that Congress really needs to look to establish a process for these kinds of requests, to remove CSAM, to establish timeframes for doing so, but yet to allow the CSAM to exist for law enforcement, prosecution, and similar purposes. Next slide. We also think that it would be a good idea for the technology companies to conduct independent audits. They should be deploying tools that identify CSAM or suspected instances of human trafficking. And once they do, we think they should be responsible for reporting this to law enforcement as well as the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. We don't support encrypted technologies and messaging for minors. We think that parents should have the ability to approve with whom children are connecting online. We think that the companies that offer these products should develop processes to permit parental oversight. And we certainly support victim-centered processes and procedures. In order for us to move forward, we have to learn from the experiences of those who have been victimized and traumatized. And so in terms of the technology, the personnel who are developing these tools, the CEOs that are running these companies, have to understand the impact on children and adults who are the subjects of the CSAM and who are being trafficked. We think that more steps should be taken for the companies to work with law enforcement, and we, of course, support increased funding for the National Human Trafficking Hotline and other such platforms and reporting mechanisms. So I want to call attention, if we could on the next slide, to our newsletter, which is published by one of our sisters, Sister Marianne Agnes Mueller, and she is a Felician Sister of North America. She did a two-part newsletter in both January and February, which shows our recommendations, but gives a very good analysis of the background about online child exploitation. And if you click on those links, they are available on our website. We did submit these newsletters to Congress to help inform them. Sister Marianne did a tremendous job in terms of research and positioning this. And there are a number of helpful resources in this. So I really encourage you to take a look at those newsletters if you want to have more information about this topic. And if it's okay, Courtney, with you, I can send you our statement for the record that we distributed to the Senate Judiciary Committee in January. And as always, I encourage you, if you suspect human trafficking, we always share the human trafficking hotline. Please report instances of human trafficking to them. It's definitely one way to try and help those who have been victimized and who are part of the human trafficking network. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Kim, I guess I can turn it back to you if you want to open it up.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Thank you for that informative and timely conversation. If there's any questions, you could either raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we'll definitely have time to answer that. And while we're waiting for anyone, I noticed I heard on the news in the last day or so about the Kids Only Safety Act that they're hearing in that. Is that under your purview right now?
Yes. I believe the one that you're talking about is what we call KOSA, the Kids Online Safety Act.
Oh,
and
okay.
I think that one's important because if my memory is right, that's bipartisan. And for many of you who've worked in advocacy, you know that that's part of the momentum and the push to get some of these bills through. When it's bipartisan, it always stands a better chance than it's simply supported by one party. And so definitely we think that that is something that we could support. I think that one of the things that's important to understand is that when we're talking about the bills, any of these would be a step in the right direction. Right now, where we're at, we need to do something and we need to act more. But COSA, we're hearing may pass. We had heard a few weeks ago that it would be earn it. I guess we'll wait and see. I'm not always good at predicting which piece will be successful, but
Right.
hopefully, if it's COSA, we'll take it.
Okay, great. Katie had a question and she says, I am told I-75 is heavy with traffickers. Is that so? And if traffic heavier near and or is traffic heavier near and or trafficking heavier near an interstate?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I guess I would have to do research to say 100% whether this, you said it was I-70,
I think
whether we've
I-75.
got I-75, whether that would be something that we should look into. It seems to me that whenever you have a major interstate and major channels, yes, because people are viewed as a commodity, it's viewed as simply like you're transporting products. And when you have the interstate, and you've got the network established, yes, I would say it's a lot more beneficial to the traffickers to be able to do that.
Yeah, I know that we always talk about technology, and technology it's good when it's good, but then when it goes south, it's like horrible when they have to when you have to monitor things like this. They teach a lot of this kind of in being informed about what your kids are doing in their Virtus classes, protecting God's children here in the Archdiocese of Chicago. So,
Well, I
but
think,
it's
Kim, to your point, they put a lot on parents. But if the parents are not technologically savvy, I don't consider myself up to speed with
mm,
every technological
mm-hmm.
development. And when there are these things happening with encryption and private messaging, the children know how to work around
Oh
them. Their
yeah.
friends tell them. And
Mm-hmm.
so parents can really be doing all that they can and doing the best that they can, and it can still happen.
Mm-hmm.
So education of children, I think, is very important. Educating parents is very
Right.
important.
Right. You're absolutely right. I think Katie had another part to her question. She says, "Is this an issue of not in my backyard? People deny it happens."
Well, I think that's a big part of it. When we talk about trafficking, I think sometimes there's a perception that it's just sex trafficking or it's happening, somewhere that not in your community. And if you pull up news reports or you follow the police reports, and again, what's being detected is just a small fraction. I would say there's every community across the country, you can find some evidence of human trafficking. And that can include sex trafficking, it can
Mhm.
include labor trafficking. We're even hearing of for sale of organs. All of that is occurring. And I think the more that we can raise awareness about a lot of these issues, the more that people will start to be engaged. And in my experience, whether you're partisan, nonpartisan, bipartisan, I don't know of anybody that supports human trafficking. So the
Right.
more that we can get awareness out there and get engagement across the aisle, I think that's a step in the right direction.
Okay. RJ had a question. Could we possibly get this presentation sent to us?
I'm happy to do that, yes. Courtney, I
Thank you
can
very
work with
much.
you for that as well as the statement if that's helpful.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Um, any okay. Oh, this is what Courtney put out. So, are there any other questions or conversations about this? I know I can say we hear it daily almost about not only human trafficking, but about the bullying, and you hear kids that have committed suicide because of the evilness that happens on the internet. So it is, and I think even kids think, oh, well, it's not going to happen to me,
Yes.
because I'm a little more savvy than the average user, but it still could happen. So that children awareness also is very important.
Well, and if I could, Kim, we talked about the child's brain and how around 10 they start seeking the affirmation and attention. One of the things I wanted to mention was the grooming, how the
Mm-hmm.
trafficker or the person who wants to exploit a child through the child sexual abuse material, they oftentimes present themselves not just as a friend, but as a love interest. And the
Mm.
child thinks, oh, I found a boyfriend, I found a girlfriend. And they think it's safe because it's online. And they think the
Mm-hmm.
person loves them and is giving them attention. They're not able to really recognize that this person may not be who they say they are. And really, they don't have my best interests at heart.
Exactly. Exactly. Any other questions, thoughts?
In just having grandchildren, but having kids that the kids are, my grandchildren are in the teens, starting in the teens now, and
Mhm.
it's, the parents almost just give up. I mean, it's just because the pressure is so much, even as coming from school, as they mandate that they have to have phones to get their assignments,
Mhm.
in a lot of schools. So, I'm just curious if there, because I see the tie-in as far as for our juvenile halls being filled up, as far as, the victims. There's such a direct pipeline, or correlation to, the early childhood traumas, the ACEs, of all of the people that we have incarcerated or that are affected by incarceration. So this just feels like a force very, very large to deal with. I just was wondering if there's any kind of, like, we were kind of created to answer a need in the church for supporting people in formation that are trying to, accompany people that have been affected by incarceration. Is there anyone that's working on how do we train our parents? How do we train kids? I mean, curriculum, because this is now an entity that's not going, if the genie's out. So it's just gonna get stronger and more ways to subvert the normal ways of picking up. Um,
I think that's a great point, Karen. And at the Alliance, we are looking into potentially building some tools. We're also looking at partnering with some of the educational um, groups that we work with so that they can offer things online to parents. And I think, as you mentioned, from my perspective, one of the most important things would be to share with the child that if this happens to you, it's not your fault. So it's okay to reach out for help and say or share if you're feeling uncomfortable. If someone sent you material that you don't want or that you didn't ask for and it's sexually explicit, because you don't have to solve every problem. When you're a teen, you don't have to know everything. And so trying to keep that dialogue between the parent and the child or the child and the guardian, I think that's really critical.
it's a good topic for almost like for circles and stuff. And how do we get families to, I mean, teaching them how to have these dialogues too is another part. So it's a model of restorative justice or restorative.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's funny. You lock your doors and windows at night and you don't make sure that your family is safe. And these tools and tablets and applications, it's almost like people are coming in and you can't firewall it, you can't stop it. I know there's
Right.
some parents that feel that way. I know myself, that's the vulnerability that I see.
Mhm.
Good analogy.
Definitely.
Yeah, RJ.
Were there any other questions?
RJ has a question.
RJ, I'm sorry. Unmute yourself, RJ.
Of course. Thank you very much. And thank you, Marilyn, for the presentation. It was really wonderful. I actually look forward to sharing this within my own community.
Thank you,
Um,
RJ.
but something that you just said that's very important is the shame of victims who have been, who have been victimized, people who have suffered either this or actually, a variety of online predation and an unwillingness to share their own stories. And it's something that you know to me is so incredibly important is the willingness of people to be able to speak about their own stories, to be able to tell others what has happened to them, and for them to and for them not to be blamed for what happened to them, for them not to, I mean, it's a classic form of victim blaming in a lot of ways, but that happens that happens all across the spectrum, but particularly to people who have been scammed or otherwise predated online. And I guess the question that would go along with this comment would just be, what are ways that we can help encourage people to be willing to speak out, be willing to share their stories, be willing to bring more attention to this, because it is something that seems to lie in the background, and it seems people try to pretend that it's not there, because otherwise it can make it can make you feel paranoid being online.
Yeah, and I think, the folks that are involved in trafficking and grooming, they know that. So just a couple points to react to your question. One, I talked a bit about the child sexual abuse material that's online and how it needs to be available to help identification and prosecution. But also from the victim standpoint, you don't want your images out there. You don't want them living in perpetuity so that in 5 or 10 years it's still there and the victimization continues. So we do need to balance the ability to identify the children and prosecute the traffickers and the groomers. But we also have to be respectful of the fact that these images should not be in perpetuity on the internet and accessible and sold and used for profit. And the other thing that I think I would mention is it's important, as you said, for victims to share their experiences, but it's also such a traumatic experience that you don't want to re-traumatize a person. And just from the work that I do at the Alliance, I think, we work with a number of survivors who have gone through the recovery and healing process and are able to do that, but not everybody is there. And it really has to be to their comfort level, but to the extent that we can support and encourage them, as you said, RJ, to make them comfortable with the fact that they can help somebody else through what they experienced and learn from it and help others so that we can stop it and prevent it. I think that's really, really important.
Another area that's been kind of coming up on this internet piece is the AI component.
Yes.
It has been, high school here, some high schoolers, they took their photos and made nude photos, and put them out on the internet. And then they're at that point when they're applying for college, and, college, everybody, your employers, your schools, everybody's looking at your profile and things on the internet now. And this could ruin their reputation.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, Kim, because it's particularly when you get into AI, you're not sure what's real. They can take a person's face and put it on a pornographic image, and it's not the person, but they're so convincing that these fake images, you can't tell that it's fake. And with respect to AI, I would like to see if they're going to allow AI on some of these platforms and applications, then use it to combat CSAM. But it seems like you're right. You said earlier, sometimes it can be used for a good purpose and sometimes it can be used for a not good purpose. And definitely, I think they call those deep fake images where you manipulate something and it's not real. That's just something that's in the world today, and we have to be willing to accept that reality and try and figure out how to deal with it.
Right. Oh, Katie, you have a question? Unmute, please.
Becca Stevens is an Episcopal minister who has a farm in Tennessee, and she does rehab for a lot of the women who have been trafficked. So it would be a good one to look up, Reverend Becca Stevens, Episcopal priest. She has worked with the women, the ones who have been trafficked and the ones who have been prostituted for a long time. So they shared their story, so it's a good place to go for a resource.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that, Becca.
She's Becca Stevens.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions before we go on to announcements or anything? Again, Marilyn, we thank you for just this important information and discussion that's truly ongoing and of not only of interest, but of importance to not only, like I say, the parents, but children too. So making us more aware of that, because like I say, kids can get around anything nowadays.
Well, thank you, Kim. And if anything passes, we'll certainly keep in touch and let you know.
Oh, definitely. Oh, yes, definitely. Hopefully, listen to the news and And like I say, if you can send it out to Karen or Kara, and we can disseminate it through CPMC. Well, thank you all for joining us. I think RJ put something else in the chat real quick. He says sometimes something that comes to mind to me for not is Pope Francis in Laudate Deum. I never was good in Latin. Not every increase in power represents progress for humanity. We need only to think of the admirable technologies that were employed to decimate populations, drop out atomic bombs, and alienate ethnic groups. There were historical moments where our admiration at progress blinded us to the horror of its consequences. It is so true. As we enter into Holy Week on next week, I pray that everyone has a blessed Holy Week and Easter Resurrection Sunday. And we look forward to seeing you on next month at our Advocate Town Hall workshop meeting to take place. Again, we thank you, Marilyn, and for all this information. And we're grateful for you being willing to come and spend time and share, as well as everyone that has joined us on today. The recording will be available for those who you might want to share or go back and listen. It will be available a few days after this presentation. Again, be blessed, and we'll see you next month.